8 or 9 years ago, I started having back pain, and I thought it was related to an old football injury, but it moved up my back, into my shoulders, into my neck, and it got worse and worse to the point where about 5, 6 years ago, I had to figure out what was going on. Um, and through a bunch of uh, tests and whatnot, I was finally able to narrow it down and find out that I had Lyme disease. What's an autoimmune reaction? It's where your body starts to fight good cells. So, like Hashimoto's, it's attacking the thyroid. It's killing the good cells because of something it doesn't like in the body. Typically, Hashimoto's is from gluten. So you don't if you're eating gluten, the body doesn't like it. It's attacking it, and then it starts just because you're eating it all the time. It eventually starts attacking good cells, and can cause things like Hashimoto's. I'm really proud of that book, even to this day. I mean, it's what 5, 6 years old now since we wrote that, but all the science in there, in the biology, in the biochemistry, I think still stands up really well today. So I'm very proud of that. But just moderate the dietary fat down a bit, and let your body burn more off your body, and then you're going to get better results. When you eat protein, the body releases insulin. Typically, not in a type 1, but it's going to release insulin to utilize the protein. It also releases glucagon to tell the liver to dump a little bit of glucose in the bloodstream, because if insulin goes up, blood sugar is going to go down, right? And if you only eat protein, no carbs, your blood sugar would crash if you just ate protein. But the body is smart. It also releases some glucagon to say, okay, I got some protein here. Let's release a little bit of glucose to make sure we don't have a blood sugar crash as I utilize this protein. Well, in a type 1, what's happening? You get the glucagon, you don't get the insulin. And so you get an extra little bump of glucose from the liver that's due to the glucagon, not the insulin. So that's typically what's happening.
That was an amazing explanation, and I'll definitely turn that into a short clip, because that was the best explanation I've heard about what's going on in a type 1 diabetic. Hello everyone, this is Nayiri from Low Carb and Fasting. Now, on this channel, I've hosted a few exceptional people with engineering backgrounds who are actually dedicating a great deal of their time and skill to nutrition research. Now, some of those people are, of course, we're all familiar with Dave Feldman and his work on cholesterol research. I've invited John Furness, Dr. John Furness, and we talked about type 1 diabetes. I've also invited Marty Kendall from Australia. Well, today's guest is another engineer, electrical engineer from Hawaii. He has actually dedicated the last 15, 20 years of his life to nutrition research. And working alongside his wife, they offer coaching services. They've been helping people to transition to ketogenic diet, and they've recently incorporated the carnivore diet into their services too. So, Craig Emmerich, welcome to Low Carb and Fasting.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's pretty interesting in this community how many engineers there are. I mean, you listed some great ones. There's also people like Ted Neiman, who's a former engineer. Tyler Cartwright from Keto Gains, he's another former engineer. So there's something about engineers that we're just curious about how things work, I think, and trying to figure out how the body works and trying to fix ourselves or other people.
I think one of the gifts that engineers have is the ability to research data and analyze data. The interpretation of data is important, and not everyone is capable to do that. So I'm very, very excited to have you on board today. Of course, I've interviewed Maria Emmerich, Craig's wife, as well, and I'll put her video link below so you can watch that interview too. Now, Craig, this channel is called Low Carb and Fasting, and so we are going to talk about the low carbohydrate diet and fasting. But let's start off with the keto diet, because you and Maria we're talking. And in fact, you were publishing books on the ketogenic diet and the recipes on keto diet before the rest of us even knew about it.
Long time. Yeah, it's been
How,
Maria
how,
herself.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, tell us about that journey. How did you even bump into the keto diet and thought, that makes sense?
Yeah. So it really started with Maria, and she had some health issues. She had PCOS, acid reflux, IBS, and she had extra weight that she was carrying around that she wanted to get rid of, but she tried all the things that we were told to do, low fat diet, exercising, running marathons, and still had all these health issues, still had this extra weight that wouldn't go away. And so she went into nutrition in college and got a lot of the same talk, same food pyramid kind of discussions in college. And she's like, I'm doing all these things and it's not helping me. And so she just decided to go off on her own and start researching on her own and reading every book she could get a hold of, and started making changes on herself. This is like 26 years ago. And she fixed her PCOS and she lost the extra weight, even though she stopped running marathons because it was hard on her joints. And, all these health improvements. And so that's where it kind of all started. And it took me a little longer to come around, to the diet side, because at the time I didn't have any health issues. And I didn't, I had maybe 30 pounds of extra weight I was carrying, office job and, traveling a lot as an engineer. But, it wasn't top of mind. And so it took me like 5 or 6 years to really come around. And the reason I came around is, she would make me the food and, I would feel great during the week. So she would help pack my lunch or whatever, and I'd feel great. And then on the weekends, I'd eat whatever I wanted, and I'd feel like crap. And I finally just decided, I want to feel good all the time. And I switched over like 5, 6 years after her, so almost 20 years ago now too. And we've both eaten this way ever since. And for her, it started to snowball into, people are asking, "What'd you do? You look so good. You so much healthier." And so she started helping people, and it kind of, long story short, it got to a point where we were adopting our kids. I had a job loss in I think it was 2007, and the big downturn. And she decided to write a book to help support the adoption, and that was her first book. And 20, I don't know, gosh, with ebooks, probably over 30 books later, here we are. It's been a big snowball effect for sure.
Craig, you've co-authored a few books with
Yes.
Maria, and one of them is the Keto, the Complete Guide.
Yeah.
And the most recent one is the Carnivore Cookbook. Now, when did the transition to carnivore come about? And why? Because as a family, I think you are pretty close to a carnivore diet now.
Yeah. Our journey is probably 12 years ago or so that I decided to move away from engineering because her business was taking off. And it was just, I looked at the numbers and I was like, I'm already doing all the work behind the scenes as far as, keeping the website going and all that kind of stuff. If I dedicated our time to this, I think we could really grow it. And we did. And for me, again, I was keto that whole time, but my keto was, I was never a big like sweets person. I'm more savory, it was, meat and maybe a little bit of low carb vegetable, but not a lot. I was primarily a very, animal protein focused diet already. But then I started having, I want to say 8 or 9 years ago, I started having back pain, and I thought it was related to an old football injury, but it moved up my back, into my shoulders, into my neck, and it got worse and worse to the point where about 5, 6 years ago, I had to figure out what was going on. And through a bunch of tests and whatnot, I was finally able to narrow it down and find out that I had Lyme disease. And Lyme disease, we up to that point, we'd helped a lot of people with Lyme disease with the keto diet, right? I think for me, it was a blessing and a curse because it enabled me to put up with the pain for a lot longer than I should have.
Mm.
And then it got progressively worse and chronic. But, so at that point, I was deciding, we knew some people in the carnivore space at that point already, 7 years ago, that one of them who's been, I think, carnivore for like 20 years now, Charlize, she has done it for her Lyme disease, for her chronic Lyme disease. She went to full carnivore to help with it. And so at that point, I said, I don't know, six plus years ago, I said, I'm going to go full carnivore and see how it helps. And it did help. It keeps my pain under control a lot better than even keto did. And that's what I've done ever since.
Can we take a moment, Craig, and define or explain what Lyme disease is for anyone who hasn't heard of
Sure.
it? Is it inflammatory disease?
So Lyme disease comes typically from a tick bite. And it started in Lyme, Connecticut. That's why it got its name. And it was this, the tick gets on you, and if you don't get it quick enough, it will have this, the Lyme, or there's other co-infections too that can come from it, like Bartonella, Babesia. There's all of these things. There's other ones too that you may have heard of, like alpha-gal. Alpha-gal is a tick disease that makes you allergic to red meat, which is my absolute fear. I hope I never get that one. But there's other ones like relapsing fever and different things you can get from a tick. Lyme disease, once you get it, most people, if they do like 4 weeks, 6 weeks of typical antibiotic, they're fine if you get it right away. But the problem is if you don't get it right away, and there's misdiagnosis. If you go to the doctor, they'll do the standard Western blot Lyme tick test. And if you talk to Lyme literate doctors, people that really know Lyme disease, they'll say 70 to 80% of the time that test gives false negatives. So it says you don't have Lyme when you really do. And so there's other tests out there. They're more expensive, but like IGeneX is the one I did, or Galaxy Labs, and they're more sensitive, and they'll be able to tell you if you really have it or not. But part of the problem is, if you treat it early, it's pretty easy usually to take care of. If you let it go for years or months and even years, the problem is it starts to just put a toll on your immune system. And a lot of times you'll develop something called chronic inflammatory response syndrome, CIRS. And that just leads to a whole bunch of other problems, right? You can get, heavy metals will go up in the body because your immune system's in such a fight or flight mode. It's fighting all the time. And, heavy metals can build up, mold can build up, all these problems that can layer up and make you feel sicker and sicker. And that's where I was. And for me, the CIRS actually triggered an autoimmune reaction, what's an autoimmune reaction? It's where your body starts to fight good cells. So like Hashimoto's, it's attacking the thyroid. It's killing the good cells because of something it doesn't like in the body. Typically Hashimoto's is from gluten. So you don't, if you're eating gluten, the body doesn't like it. It's attacking it. And then it starts, just because you're eating it all the time, it eventually starts attacking good cells and can cause things like Hashimoto's. In my case, it wasn't a food trigger. It was the Lyme that caused this, constant thing. And then it starts attacking good cells. And I've got what's called ankylosing spondylitis, which is an autoimmune disorder that most of the bones in my neck are fused together with calcium. And it affects the back and shoulders and like my hip joints, they accumulate calcium and stuff in them. And so it's something that I'll have to deal with forever, but carnivore definitely helps me manage the pain better.
Are you on any medications for it? Or are there any effective medications out there that perhaps not just painkillers, but address?
Yeah. So
something more deep.
One of the things, again, like I mentioned, chronic Lyme disease, we have, patient clients that see huge improvements just with keto. And so it depends where you are on that kind of spectrum of disease, right? If you're earlier on and within the first few months or whatever, diet can do a lot to help. But at some point, especially when you start getting these autoimmune reactions that progress, like there's no diet in the world that's going to get the calcium out of my neck, or my hip. So the pain is going to be there. There are biologicals that you can take and I've tried several now. I've done Humira and Cosentyx. Humira was doing a pretty good job for me keeping my inflammation down and keeping the pain under control. But then I developed antibodies for it. So literally like tomorrow, I'm going to be starting a new one that my rheumatologist is going to try.
Well, I can only wish you all the best with it, and hopefully it will make some difference. Can't be easy living with constant pain. So how does nutrition help?
Well, that's where, like I said, the carnivore diet does help control the pain to a more manageable level. If I get too much plants in my diet, I'll actually see pain go up. And my personal feelings on that, why that is, all plants have anti-nutrients. So these are compounds that your body doesn't need, doesn't want, can't use. Things like oxalates, glucosinolate, lectins, these type of compounds in the plants, which are really just like natural pesticides or protective mechanisms for the plants, right? To keep things from eating them, right? Because if you think about a plant does not want you to eat the stalk, the roots, the leaves, because that kills the plant. It wants you to eat some of the fruit and spread the seeds, but that's really it. And so the plants, they don't want to be eaten. And so they have mechanisms in them to protect themselves, kind of like natural pesticides or herbicides. And though in a normal, functioning human who's got a great metabolism and no health issues, they can handle detoxing those anti-nutrients in plants and be fine. Somebody like me who's got this, chronic inflammation, my immune system is all, on this fight or flight mode. It's already fighting all these issues. Adding in those other anti-nutrients just puts an extra load on the body to detox these things, causing more inflammation, causing pain to go up. And so that's what I believe the mechanism is.
Would you say the carnivore diet is superior to any other diet that we can think of? And by carnivore, I'm also including small amounts of vegetable here and there, but basically meat-heavy diet or meat-based diet.
Yeah, even when we were...
So then why?
Yeah, so, even before carnivore was a thing, 10 years ago when we were promoting keto and low carb, we always were very protein forward. So we from our research and going back to the book you mentioned that I co-authored, Keto, the Complete Guide, I'm really proud of that book even to this day. I mean, it's what, 5-6 years old now since we wrote that, but all the science in there and the biology and the biochemistry, I think still stands up really well today. So I'm very proud of that. And one of the things we talked about in there is, and 5-6 years ago, in the carnivore community, this is pretty well known now, but 5-6 years ago, a lot of people didn't know this. I didn't even know this 7-8 years ago when I was writing the book. The most nutrient dense food you can eat is pretty much, animal protein. And so I dedicated a whole chapter in that book to look at these charts, look at how much I picked out, like the top 13 most essential vitamins and minerals, and compared animal proteins like a steak, beef, to kale, to blueberries, to apples, all these things that we're told are superfoods, right? And it just blew them out of the water. There's no comparison. Just the steak has so many more vitamins and minerals. And at the time I'd been in, researching nutrition, for, I don't know, 6-8 years at that point, and I didn't know this. And so I'm like, this needs to be more known, right? And so we made that whole chapter in the book, and we've always, using that knowledge and background, we were always in this place of, we know this has all the vitamins and minerals. We know we need protein to build muscle and maintain muscle and stay strong, especially as we get older. So protein needs to be and by the way, if you're trying to lose weight, more protein and less carbs and maybe a little less fat really helps with weight loss. Protein has a high thermic effect of food, which means you burn a lot of calories digesting protein, a lot more than you do from carbs or fat. And so, all of these things kind of add up to, we need to prioritize protein. And that's how we've always kind of been. To go further and cut out all the plants, that's totally fine. We look at it as more of a choice. If you want the variety to have some plants, low carb vegetables, great, do it. If you don't have, immune system problems like me and you can tolerate it, great, go for it. But I also don't think that going fully to carnivore is negative in any way. Like there's no negatives to it as far as like developing deficiencies or any these kind of things. And I would also point to, in that case, our ancestors. So if you go back, 50,000 years ago and you look at the early humans and Neanderthals and you look at what they ate, how did they become human in the first place, right? Because at that point, suddenly we got smarter, bigger brains. We learned how to make fire and do all these things, right? And hunt and tools. What was happening? What were we eating to make us evolve that way and change? Well, there's tons of studies now on this. They look at fossilized bone collagen, and they look at the nitrogen content. And by the types of nitrogen groups that are in that, you can tell what kind of protein they ate and how much. And so was it plant proteins or was it animal proteins and how much, right? Every one of these studies show that those early humans were apex carnivores. They ate almost entirely animal proteins and were on the top of the food chain. And so, if you think of that from the current state where we're talking about carnivore, do I think it's superior? I think it's definitely how the body's designed to process mainly animal proteins.
We've come a long way, I think. A few years ago, it was controversial to say, oh, you're carnivore. But we have come a long way. I mean, certainly on social media now, many more people, including people from the type 1, from my community, type 1 diabetes community, are now entertaining the idea or even experimenting with it of the carnivore diet. So, but Craig, you mentioned we're protein buddies, or we're very pro-protein, you and Maria. I'm glad you mentioned that because that was on my list. Now, you prioritize protein so much that Maria, and perhaps you as well, actually recommend something called protein sparing fasting. What's that about?
So protein sparing modified fast, it's not a great name. It's a clinical term that was given to it.
It's quite a mouthful.
Yeah. 10, 15 years ago, when Maria was helping clients lose weight quickly, and if they would stall, she would tell them to do something called a pure protein day. Much better name, in my opinion, but it was really referring to the same thing. And it's later on that we found in articles and papers the term protein sparing modified fast. What it means is you modify a fast. So a water, if let's say you do drink no food, just water for multiple days, 2 or 3 days, you're going to have some weight, definitely have weight loss, but all the studies will show that you're going to lose some muscle too. Okay. And it's, depends on how adapted you are. Like if you're already keto adapted, I think the studies say maybe around 1/4 pound per day of water only fasting. If you're not keto adapted, you come from standard American diet, the first day or two, you lose like 1.5 pounds or so. I mean, it's because the body's still looking for glucose, right? And so the only place to get it is from muscle to turn it into glucose, gluconeogenesis. And so the term modify fast, you modify a water fast to spare protein, spare your body's protein, not the dietary protein. So you spare the protein on the body, the muscle, by modifying a water fast. Okay, so that's where the term comes from. What's the mechanism? Really, for us, it's coming from that prioritizing protein mindset and a low carb ketogenic approach on carbohydrates. So what's the one thing that's left to change? Fat, right? It's the only dial you have left, right? So what we did early on, and still this day, is we will give them as a tool, just like a tool. A water fast is a tool. You don't tell somebody water fast for 3 months. Like you don't, that's not going to work. You don't want to do that. You do it a day here, 2 days there. Same thing with protein sparing modified fast. You do a day here, a day or two there, and it's a way to speed up your weight loss. It's a way to maintain your muscle, but by dialing the fat down even more in the diet, it forces your body to burn more off the body, right? So by eating even less dietary fat, you're forced to burn more body fat for fuel and lose more body fat. So it's a way to speed up weight loss or to break a stall.
So practically speaking, what would I be eating or drinking if I decided to go on a 24-hour or maybe 36-hour modified help me with it.
PSMF, that's easier.
PSMF. So what would I be eating or drinking?
Drinking, I mean, water's great. We especially if weight loss is the goal, we tell people don't drink your calories. Don't be drink. You just don't register satiety as well when you drink a shake, or even if it's low carb or those kind of things. But for food, it's just going to be leaner proteins. Animal proteins primarily. It's going to be. You can have some other things, and this is where Maria comes in, because she's an absolute wizard in the kitchen, and she can come up with things like her protein sparing pudding, where it's this luscious chocolate or different flavor she's got now, pudding that's made from eggs, and the protein sparing version is made from egg whites, and it's amazing. Like it's pudding, right? You could give it to your kid, and we actually have a lot of people that are in this community that want to feed their kids better, but their kids are like aversive to some of the foods. A lot of clients, they'll say their kid wouldn't eat eggs, but they love the protein sparing pudding. So it's a great way to get your kids some healthier food too, which is kind of neat. But there's a lot of recipes and things, but it's primarily like leaner cuts of meat. Your fish, chicken breast, leaner beef like tenderloin, those kind of cuts. Maybe some spices and some one of Maria's lower fat sauces or something like mustard would be good, because that's low carb, low fat. That's about it. So you're really little to no carbohydrates, maybe 20 or 30 grams of fat in the diet, which is enough to absorb fat soluble vitamins and make sex hormones and things you need to do with fat in a day, the essential fatty acids. But that's it, and the rest is protein.
Yeah. So you mentioned the pudding. There's, of course, Maria's famous protein sparing bread as well.
Yes.
The egg whites or egg white powder, I think she uses.
Yeah, egg whites and egg white protein powder is
egg white protein powder is the other one. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about fat now, because you did mention fat is that the last diet left if you're not losing weight, right? If you reach a plateau, could it be that, okay, your carbs are stable, but you are overdoing the fat? Not many people know that. I mean, I notice I don't, I'm at a stable weight. I don't like using the word weight, because of course there is muscle weight and then there's fat weight, and so I don't have excess fat to lose. But if I don't watch my fat intake, I notice I can gain fat, and I know it goes in one place in my body, goes around my tummy. That's exactly where it goes, and I notice it. So I'm always sort of watchful of it and mindful of, am I overdoing the fat? And of course, I mean, if you're type 1, you should know this. You're going to require a lot more insulin if you are
exactly. I was going to say that.
You
Yeah.
talk about that. Now you and Maria talk about that, and you meet so much. You receive a lot of attacks. I mean, I've seen a lot of them on Facebook or Twitter. I don't understand why. Because I fully agree with you. I see it. I see it in myself too. If I'm not watching the fat, I'm going to require a lot more insulin.
Me too. Well, I'll gain weight. I can gain. I've been zero carb for, I don't know, 6+ years now, and I can gain and lose 10, 15, 20 pounds if I don't watch it, especially over the holidays. If I, get a little too much of the fatty cuts of meat and whatnot, I'll see the weight gain. But yeah, it kind of goes back to, first of all, it comes back to kind of a dogma approach with carnivore, which unfortunately there are some groups and people in carnivore that it's like, kind of like a dogma, like you gotta eat the fattiest cuts and that's it, and don't even talk about reducing fat, or and I don't know where that comes from or why there are those groups. But at the end of the day, you got to ask, where does the fat you eat go? I mean, you put fat in your mouth and gets into your digestive tract. It's got really only two places it can go: get absorbed in the bloodstream or go right through you. But here's the thing about going right through you. First of all, there's been a study on this, which is really good. It varied the dietary fat from 68 grams, I think, to like 156 grams, something like that. And they collected the stool and analyzed how much fat ended up in the stool. And it was always like 3 grams of fat in the stool. That's it. So even, adding 98 grams of extra fat to the diet, it was maybe like 1 extra gram that ended up in the stool. So it's not going there. And if it did, you would know it. Like, and you can actually do this. You can, there is a limit to, especially rapidly absorbed type of fats like MCT oil. There's a limit to how much you can absorb, right? If you like drinking it, and you'll get disaster fat. Like it'll be ugly. You'll be in the bathroom for a while. So in normal situations, eating normal whole foods, it's a couple grams that's going out there. So where's the rest going? It's going in your bloodstream. And from there, two important notes. Number one, it's going to get stored in your fat cells because you want it to. If it didn't, where's it going to go? It's going to sit in the bloodstream and you have sky-high triglycerides. Nobody wants that. Or if it accumulates in your organs or in your liver, nobody wants that. You want the fat going into your fat cells, right? And so if your fat cell is what you're trying to shrink, trying to get rid of that body fat, and you're adding more fat to it, that's, it's kind of like having a bucket with a hole in the bottom, a bucket of water, and it's got a hole in the bottom and slowly draining, and you dump more water in the top to make it empty faster. That doesn't make sense. And so moderating the dietary fat down, I mean, again, we're not telling people to do protein sparing every day. That's a tool you do occasionally, but just moderate the dietary fat down a bit and let your body burn more off your body. And then you're going to get better results. And back to your point on insulin, this is my presentation at KetoCon or Hack Your Health this year. I did it in Tennessee earlier this year. It was all about insulin. And this is, I believe, where the majority of this thought process in a lot of carnivore spaces comes from, that fat is kind of a free food. And it's the idea that it doesn't raise insulin. And it's completely wrong. Number one, if you do it in isolation, you just give a bolus of, glucose, bolus of protein, bolus of fat. Yeah, fat raises insulin the least amount in a postprandial after you eat kind of way, but it still raises it. And again, it has to. You want that fat getting out of the bloodstream, right? You don't want it sitting there and triglycerides through the roof. But the other thing about it is when you eat it in combination with protein and carbohydrates, or even if you don't have any carbohydrates and just have it in combination with protein, it acts as an amplifier for pancreas output of insulin. And in someone like you, this is, I love looking at type 1s and studies on type 1s, because you know exactly how much insulin is required all day long, right? And so I know you know this, and all the type 1s that we work with know this. If you overdo fat, it's going to feel like you can't get enough insulin in you to get things back to normal, because you've got this, the body is fighting to get all this fat stored away, which means less insulin is used to get the glucose stored away. So your blood glucose just sits higher through the day, and it just seems like a struggle to get it down. So that is, I think, something that this community really needs to understand better, is what that true role of insulin is, not so much as a storage hormone, as more of a thermostat for your bloodstream to tightly control the fuel in the bloodstream to where it wants to.
Well, okay. I do want to make a comment on the fat as well, because I'm doing an experiment on myself. So I have a comment to make. Yeah. But before I do that, can we talk about protein and its effect on insulin and blood sugars? Yeah. Protein, actually, there's this joke going around on Facebook. I've seen it on Facebook mostly, that, when that protein or part of that protein turns into cake, you're eating steak and it's going to turn into cake. So yeah, because we know as type 1s, we know that even on a pure protein diet, we're going to get a blood sugar spike. So we're going to require insulin for protein too. So let's talk about protein.
Yeah, so you're probably familiar with R.D. Dykman and type 1 grit and his work with Dr. Bernstein. R.D.'s 2 islands over that way. So we want to get together with him. He's a friend of ours, but I think that protein doesn't turn into chocolate cake kind of started with him. But anyway, what you're seeing in a type 1, so first of all, yes, protein requires more insulin than fat, but less than carbohydrates. Mm-hmm. I think typically people like type 1s will bolus maybe 0.5 of what they would do for carbohydrate, like half as much insulin as they would for carbohydrate for protein. And the reason for it is twofold. Number one, you need insulin to utilize protein. So you need the insulin to break down protein and build muscle, right? And you don't want, in a type 1 that's not taking exogenous insulin, 2 things are happening. They're basically dumping fuel out of their body like crazy. And this kind of gets back to the true role of insulin being that more thermostat than a storage hormone. You basically can no longer hold all the fuel in storage. So the fat cells and the glucose, the body without insulin, I like to think of insulin as almost more of a net over your fat cells, holding back all the energy. And when you don't have any insulin, it all just floods in the bloodstream and you're urinating glucose and, all this energy just can't be held into the body. And so when you have, and the other thing, the reason I brought that up is their muscle will deteriorate and break down too, because you're not able to take protein and make new muscle or replace muscle. And so you need insulin to use protein. Now, how much of that turns into a glucose? The body is pretty smart when it comes to fuels, and there's something called oxidative priority, which prioritizes the order in which fuels are prioritized when you eat things. And the reason it mainly comes down to toxicity or storage space. So alcohol, no storage, you have to burn that first. So, and then while you had alcohol, if you had any carbohydrates, they get stored away. If you had any fat, that gets stored away. But protein is not really used as a fuel unless it really has to be. A small amount of protein will get turned into glucose, gluconeogenesis. And Dr. Lehman, who's one of the experts on protein that's out there, Dr. Donald Lehman, he says it's kind of almost like a little bit of a constant rate, like 10% will get turned into glucose. But if you're not eating any carbohydrates, your body does still need some glucose, right? There's brain neurons, there's red blood cells that don't have mitochondria, so they have to have glucose. So I've seen numbers in the 60 to 80 grams a day of glucose that's needed. So the body has to create that, and it creates it by turning protein into glucose. So some of that is good. Some of that is supplying the processes that need glucose when you're eating a zero carb diet. But there's also a phenomenon that with type 1s exasperates it. And that is that when you eat protein, the body releases insulin, typically, not in a type 1, but it's going to release insulin to utilize the protein. It also releases glucagon to tell the liver to dump a little bit of glucose in the bloodstream, because if insulin goes up, blood sugar is going to go down, right? And if you only eat protein, no carbs, your blood sugar would crash if you just ate protein. But the body is smart. It also releases some glucagon to say, okay, I got some protein here. Let's release a little bit of glucose to make sure we don't have a blood sugar crash as I utilize this protein. Well, in a type 1, what's happening? You get the glucagon, you don't get the insulin. And so you get an extra little bump of glucose from the liver that's due to the glucagon, not the insulin. So that's typically what's happening.
That was an amazing explanation, and I'll definitely turn that into a short clip, because that was the best explanation I've heard about what's going on in a type 1 diabetic. I discussed this with Dr. Sean Baker as well. He also explained about the glucagon, but this was by far one of the best explanations I've heard. Okay, so back to the I was going actually to make a comment on the difference I've noticed between my two diets. So lower fat diet, carbs are always super low, so carbs are stable, protein is stable, but just increased fat and lower fat. So the two macronutrients, protein and carbs, stable, but playing with the fat. Yep. My blood sugar fluctuations throughout the day are much less.
Yeah.
On a higher fat diet, much less fluctuations. Of course, maybe the fat is also sort of stopping the protein blood sugar spike, after protein. So that's a good thing. So my blood sugar fluctuations are absolutely minimal. I have never seen them that minimal. However, they're running slightly higher than where I'd like to be. Yeah. But it's a wonderful sort of experiment to do. So on a lower fat diet, now I get an immediate spike after protein. I mean, both are good in a way, in different ways. Both are good. Both are working for me. And I'm not putting on weight. So even though I'm having higher fat, maybe I'm using it up. I feel just equally well on slightly lower. I'm not talking about low fat diet. But just lower and slightly higher fat. But it was a noticeable sort of difference that I'm no longer having any fluctuations, especially postprandial bump, because of protein, not carbs, because of the protein. I'm not getting that anymore because of the higher fats, which actually pleases me. But I'm generally on the higher side. So I'm like, my baseline blood sugar levels are like 120. They're floating at 120. So I don't know how to feel about it now, but it was a good experiment anyways.
And that is again pointing back to insulin's function. That is what you'll see a little higher glucose throughout the day with the higher fat, because you're putting a higher overall load on the insulin, right? It's gotta, now it doesn't have to just deal with protein, it's also going to deal with the extra fat too. It's raising the overall load required for the insulin. And it all depends on goals too, right? If your goal, and that's one thing I think in this community that people lose sight of, is people I really like and respect, like Dr. Sean Baker or Dr. Chaffee. Sean is actually pretty much in sync with what we recommend. But people like Dr. Chaffee will say, just eat all the fat, right? And don't worry about, and to some extent that can work well for people, but you have people metabolically damaged, that, you know, they don't get this, they have leptin resistance, and they don't get the signal I'm full like other people do. And we see this all the time, you know, women that are 5'4" and 300 pounds, and they've been doing carnivore for 2 years and they've barely lost any weight. And it's because they don't get the I'm full signal, and they're still overeating even though they're eating carnivore. And so this is where you have to look at it and say, let's not use a one size fits all approach and everybody just eats the fattiest cuts of meat. Let's tailor it a little bit to the goals. And if your goal is weight loss, maybe make at least one of the meals a leaner protein source. If it's, you know, type 1 diabetes, you know, play with it, you know, for your numbers. If it's Alzheimer's, well, you might want all the fattiest cuts because you need more ketones for the brain, and, you know, these kind of, so you got to tailor it more to the goals.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, each context is different, completely different. So even talking about type 1s, my experience of my type 1 diabetes is totally different from someone else's. What works for me doesn't necessarily work for someone else. But
exactly.
I mean, you when I introduced you, Craig, I didn't mention, in fact, I should have, that you're also proud dad of 2 adorable adopted sons. And you raised them on a meat-based diet. In fact, they were raised on a low carbohydrate diet, and recently they are eating what the rest of the family is eating, carnivore diet.
Carnivore, yeah.
In fact, I think Maria mentioned that you have a book on how to raise babies, right? Or how to feed babies on a carnivore diet. So let's talk about that.
Well, our book is called Sugar-Free Kids, and it kind of covers, you know, from all the way from, you know, babies' first foods to teenagers, and just talking again, focusing on the things that are important, like nutrient-dense foods. And it was really neat about that book is we did it in a fun way. Like there's, you know, these cartoon characters, and like you talk about amino acids, we made them into little Legos, you know, the building blocks, you know, for protein. And it's pretty cool book. A lot of people really like that book, and we were blessed to have Holly Berry write the foreword to that book, so that was really cool. But yeah, you know, we adopted our boys and brought them home when they were 1 and 2 years old, and they didn't have the best nutrition. And, you know, they fed them what they didn't have. Ethiopia is a very poor country. There's 2 million orphans at the time that we adopted them. And so they came to us not even really registering on the height and weight charts, like 1%. And we just started feeding them what we eat, really. I mean, Kai's first solid foods were bone marrow, and which is amazing for babies at that stage, because the brain, you know, one of the things that drives me absolutely crazy about the way we transition kids off of breast milk, if you go to the store and look at what's on the store for baby food, it's basically you go from breast milk, which is fairly high in protein, pretty high in fat, to, you know, baby food, which is almost no protein and 0 fat. Like it's practically vegetarian baby food. And it's like, what's the, you know, their brains are huge proportion to their body. They need fuel. That's why, you know, breast milk also has quite a bit of glucose, because they need all fuels. And a baby, even on breast milk, will be in a state of ketosis. 0.5 is basically their baseline for blood ketones, and within an hour or two, they're up to like 2 or 3, because this huge brain needs all this energy. It needs fat, glucose, and ketones, everything it can get, because it's so disproportional to the body size. But you know, so you look at it that way, bone marrow is a wonderful first food, because they're probably going to love it, because their palates haven't been shifted to sugar yet, hopefully. And you know, because that's one of the things that a lot of people we make mistake of, is they start feeding them ice cream and all these sugary treats at, you know, a year old, 2 years old, and you can really shift the palate. You can really change what they crave and desire and what they taste. And so we, even to this day, our boys don't really have a sweet tooth. I mean, they just, we do whenever they want for birthdays or whatever. We'll do, the sugar-free desserts and things that Maria makes, keto desserts, and they'll have a bite or two and they're done. Like, they just don't need it. But we started them out on bone marrow, on we make salmon and break it up in these little pieces he could pick up with his fingers, and egg yolks, and beef, we would just puree it. I mean, we just fed them a lot of the same stuff we were eating, and within a year they're at 50% on the height and weight charts, and in 2 years like 75, and they stayed there ever since, in that range. So they're thriving. But I don't think it's crazy. I made this little meme that I posted a while back, and we get this all the time. Is keto safe for kids? And on the picture, it's a picture of Kai eating one of Maria's keto recipes, and it's like this beautiful stir fry with some meat and vegetables and all the stuff in it, and he's eating with his chopsticks. And the other side, I put the typical kid diet of today, which is a rainbow of processed garbage and sugar. And on his side, it's like, is keto safe for kids? And then on the other one, just let them be kids, right? So it's like, when did eating meat and low carb vegetables become such an extreme diet that we question whether kids can eat it? Like, it's mind boggling.
Yeah, talking of R.D. Dykman, when I invited him to the channel, we did talk about parents just wanting kids to be kids.
Yeah.
What does that even mean? I mean, What kind of kids? I mean,
well, for example, what were kids today versus 10 years ago, 20, 50 years ago? Like, I remember one of my favorite anecdotes from, the Little House on the Prairie. Do you know that?
Yes.
Show?
Yes.
Yeah. Those are the early days, settler days and they got a penny at Christmas time to go to the general store to get one piece of candy. That was their like Christmas treat for the whole year. Like, that one piece of candy, right? So, I mean, what's normal for a kid now versus, I mean, it's just crazy. The stuff that kids eat now, I'm really surprised that growth is not stunted more, or just deficiencies developing. And I mean, we are in bad shape. I mean, the obesity in kids is terrible. The disease rates are going through the roof. It's crazy.
Adding to that example, my mother remembers when she was a child in the 1940s. Every Christmas, and in the Christmas stocking, they would get an orange, because oranges would be in season then, and there was always orange and some nuts. Now, of course, we have access to carbohydrates whenever we want, so, and unlimited amounts of carbohydrates.
Gallons of orange juice, and all refined and concentrated sugar, basically.
Let's talk about nutritional deficiencies before we finish this. So, what are we deficient in mostly? I think Maria mentioned magnesium and the importance of magnesium. Let's start off with that, and then add any others that you routinely recommend to your clients.
Yeah, for sure. Magnesium is one of the most common deficiencies. I think like 70% or 70 or 80% of Americans are deficient in magnesium. I think the primary reason for that is we used to get a lot in our water supply. Natural spring water and those kind of things have quite a bit of magnesium in them. And today, what do we drink? It's all city water that's filtered, or bottled water that's filtered. All the nutrients are filtered out of it. And I think that's a big part of it. But if you look at in general, I mean, there's been studies on this. One recent study I saw on just the food supply in general for vegetables and fruits showed that in 50 years from, I want to say, it was like 1960 to 2010, something like that. In that 50-year span, the vitamins and minerals in general, overall, in vegetables and fruit had gone down anywhere from like 70% to 30 to 70. I think the average is like 40 or 50% reduction in vitamins and minerals in those plants. And because it's, the over farming and the soil is being depleted, and, the row crops and the, just depletion of the soil means the plants have less and we're getting less vitamins and minerals. And so I think that's definitely a factor in a lot of the disease process and issues people have today, is because there's something to say too for nutrient dense foods, and we've always from the beginning promoted eating the most nutrient dense foods you can, because anybody, what vegan to carnivore or whatever in between, if you give me 2 plates, same calories, and one has double the vitamins and minerals of the other one, and they're both whole foods, everybody's gonna say the one with more vitamins and minerals is probably healthier for you, right? And so always look for that more nutrient dense approach. And that's why we prioritize protein so much. But when you're eating plants that majority of Americans are eating things that are so devoid in vitamins and minerals, it's going to drive more hunger because your body's looking for those nutrients. It's like, I haven't gotten enough of these essential vitamins and minerals, go eat some more food. And I think that's an underlying issue with the processed food and obesity crisis in America too, is they're not getting enough vitamins and minerals. And so as far as individual ones, we definitely like K2 for a lot of people, just because it's a very important vitamin for the body. It regulates calcium metabolism, so it gets calcium where it needs to be in the bones and keeps it out of
K2 without D3, even without D3.
Well,
recommend K2.
If you're deficient in D3, then it can be a problem. But as long as you have good D3 levels, you can have K2 by itself. And of course, it's fat soluble, so you need to eat it with a fat to absorb it, of course. But that one we tell most people to supplement, especially if you have any history of heart disease or anything in your family, or kidney stones and these kind of things. It can help keep the calcium going where it should go. And it normally comes from organ meats, naturally fermented vegetables, which nobody naturally ferments anymore, and then some in like hard cheeses and stuff. But you just don't get as much because we don't really eat organ meats anymore, and we don't eat naturally fermented vegetables. So that's another one that sticks out to me that I think is good to supplement.
Any others?
From there, I think it depends on the person and the situation. And that's where Maria is amazing at looking at symptoms and saying, okay, XYZ symptom, I think you really need more of this supplement. And especially in a therapeutic situation, like, if you've been eating this food that is, 50% less vitamins and minerals for long periods of time, and we think supplements can really help you, especially in the early stages. Some in the carnivore community will poo-poo supplements in general, saying you don't need them. But if you've been chronically deprived and deficient, I think at least in the beginning, topping up your body and really, getting these vitamins and minerals on board can be very helpful.
One last question, and it just popped to my mind. People who transition to a carnivore diet or generally a meat-heavy diet complain about this particular thing: constipation. It takes them a long time to understand, hey, there isn't that much wastage in meat, so you are not going to have that need to run to the bathroom, actually, toilet, as we call it in the UK, 3 times a day. So
well, it's partly that, but also we see almost as many people who get diarrhea when they start out too. And I think it leads to 2 things typically. And again, this is not 100%, but a lot of the cases, the diarrhea is because they're not producing enough protease to properly digest the increase in protein. So adding a digestive enzyme, maybe some HCl to make sure you're properly digesting the meat can help. And then on the other side, the constipation, when you cut all the carbohydrates out of your diet, carbohydrates retain water. And so with each carbohydrate molecule, I think there's like 5 water molecules that are stored with it. And so when you cut the carbs, you retain less water. But when you flush out that water, and that's a lot of times when people go keto or carnivore in the first couple of weeks, they might lose 10 pounds or something, at 20 pounds. It's mostly water weight being flushed. Mm-hmm. But guess what? Every time water leaves the body, electrolytes go with. So sodium, magnesium, potassium. And so when you're in the early stages and you're flushing this water out, if you don't keep your electrolytes up, constipation can happen. And it's because the colon is this master extractor of moisture from the stool. If you're not retaining enough, getting enough electrolytes to retain the water, it'll suck it out of the stool and make it, make you constipated. So adding some electrolytes a lot of times can help in that situation.
Brilliant explanation. Craig Emmerich, it's been a wonderful hour. I really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you so much for accepting my invitation.
I had so much fun, and thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Craig, would you like to share some of your nutrition charts so I can put them on the screen?
Absolutely. Just tell me which charts you want, and I'll send images for sure.
Thank you very much. Bye for now.
Thank you. Take care.